Hey everyone, it's Andrew from the Coaster101 podcast. We know your other favorite podcasts probably have the occasional ad read for things like mattresses or meal kits, but this ad is a little different because we're marketing something that we're actually selling. The holiday season is fast approaching, and we wanted to let you know about two gift ideas for the coaster enthusiast in your life. First up is our annual roller coaster calendar. We're selling it on our website right now for $15, and that includes free U.S. shipping. The 2021 calendar features 13 months worth of roller coasters from parks including Kings Island, Cedar Point, and Busch Gardens Tampa. Best of all, we're donating 100% of the net proceeds to Give Kids the World Village in Central Florida. They're a great organization who provides critically ill children and their families with cost-free Orlando vacations, and we love supporting them at Coaster 101. You can find the calendar in the show notes on our website at coaster101.com, or you can find it directly at c101.co/21calendar, or by texting the word calendar to 419-742-2101. We also have a line of Coaster 101 and other coaster-related merchandise in our TeePublic shop. From shirts, notebooks, stickers, face masks, you name it, we probably have it. And it's all designed by Coaster 101's own Kyle Linder, and I've actually done a few designs there myself. Be sure to check that out at c101.co/shirts or by texting merch, MERCH, to 419-742-2101. We really appreciate the support, and with that, here's this week's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Coaster 101 podcast. I'm Andrew Stillwell, joined this week by Shane Joseph up in Massachusetts. Shane, how's it going?
I'm doing pretty good, Andrew. Thanks for asking.
And I am joined by the godfather of Coaster 101 himself, John Stevenson. John, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
I'm great.
Good.
It's good to be back. It's been a little while, and this week we're going to discuss something that shouldn't be too controversial, but maybe it will be. We're going to talk some of our favorite B&M inverts, which is a pretty niche topic. But of the 130 roller coasters that B&M has built, more than a quarter of them are actually inverts, and those range from the original Batman at Six Flags Great America, which was built in 1992, well before Shane was born, to next year's Monster at Grönalund in Sweden, which is actually going to be the first new B&M invert to open in 7 years. John, what can you tell us about inverted roller coasters and kind of how they got their start?
Yeah, so the concept of an inverted roller coaster with inversions, because of course before then you had the aero suspended coaster where the cars were suspended below the track and swung freely, but the concept of an inverted roller coaster where the trains were fixed, the cars were not swinging, was developed by Jim Wintrode, the then general manager of Six Flags Great America near Chicago in the early 1990s. And so they had already worked with B&M, Bolliger Mabillard on Iron Wolf, which was the company's first roller coaster. It was the stand-up roller coaster that opened in 1990, I believe. And so Jim worked with Bolliger Mabillard to develop this coaster, which turned out to be Batman the Ride, which opened in 1992. And so from there, that what we know today as the inverted coaster was born. And since then, it's been, there are 30 operating right now, and 32, whatever Andrew just said, whatever number. And so that's kind of it got its humble beginnings at Great America, which is one of the smaller models, but to this day it still holds its own and has been, of course, duplicated and has been installed in parks around the world.
So yeah, obviously we've all ridden our fair share of B&M inverts, and do you guys think they do the inverted coaster better than pretty much anyone else out there? I know there's not a lot of competition. Shane, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say they definitely do. Their only other major competition for an inverted coaster is, of course, the SLC from Vekoma, the suspended looping coaster, which is notoriously rough and bad. So yeah, I think they certainly do it better, especially because any B&M is notable for being very smooth and clean transitions and all that. So I definitely think that they have kind of a reputation of, you know what you're getting into as far as what the ride is going to entail. But they do a good job of switching it up every time and adding different elements. The only other ones that I've been on besides an SLC would be the giant inverted boomerang, like the one at my home park, Goliath, at Six Flags New England, which is also pretty bad, mainly due to the trains, because I know the year it opened, they had good trains and it was fine, but since then I guess something happened. They got new heavier trains and they're just as janky as the SLC ones. And then the Intamin launch shuttle coasters, so those obviously are very different, can't really be compared. So as far as anything that would be similar to it from other manufacturers, I think it's pretty clear B&M does it best.
John, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think B&M definitely has the market covered when it comes to inverted coasters. I mean, that's the first thing when I hear the word inverted and coaster. B&M pretty much always follows, and so I think, I mean, they're obviously they're B&M, so they're very visually appealing. They are, I think a lot of them do a great job of interacting with the elements, whether it's the terrain, the scenery. I think they can be themed very well. They're forceful. Of course, just the free, nothing below you gives a whole different ride experience than some of the others that, where you're a little bit more, closed in. So I think they are really great attractions, and obviously some of them are, more memorable than the others. But I think as a whole, they're a really solid product from B&M, and I think a wise investment for any park that decides to build one.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely enjoy, I mean, as with most B&Ms, I really enjoy them. Inverts more so than their sit downs or the dive coasters or any other model that they've got, the hyper coasters. Sometimes they're a little more difficult as a larger individual to ride, because not all of them, I ran into this last year when we visited Great America. They don't all have that big guy seat, and the way you can find the big guy seat on an inverted coaster is it's the one with two seat belts. You'd think that, B&M at this point, especially sending coasters to America where there are a lot of larger people, would just go ahead and put two seat belts on every restraint. But I know there's probably a reason behind why they don't do this. And typically when you're in those quote unquote big boy seats, you're typically stuck somewhere in like row 3 through 5. So you've got a lovely view of the row in front of you, but can't really see a whole lot of what's going on. But that said, I mean, they result in a very, very smooth ride experience. As far as the restraints go, I really like the vest restraints that they're starting to do now on the newer coasters. I know this started with Banshee at Kings Island. It provides a really, really comfortable ride. It's also on the B&M wing coasters, but those vest restraints provide a far more comfortable ride than the old headbanging against the hardened rubber. One thing I don't like about B&Ms, and I don't know if Six Flags still does this, but a couple of years ago I was at Six Flags over Texas, and they were running their Batman coaster backwards. Oh. And it was I'm not going to say it was one of the worst coaster experiences I've ever had, because I've ridden some pretty bad rides. It was so disorienting.
Yeah.
I think those coasters were obviously designed and profiled in such a way for a reason. So when you take on that first vertical loop after the drop, you take it, facing forward, you kind of know what you're doing. But when you can't see a vertical loop coming, and I get this on boomerang coasters too, it's incredibly disorienting. The forces kind of interact with you in a wrong way. Every B&M invert that I've been on, I really enjoyed, except for that one ride on Batman at Six Flags over Texas. But what do you guys think? Obviously, coaster nerds, we all have our classifications, but where do you guys think flying coasters kind of fit into the inverted equation? It's like an inverted coaster with a different train.
I would classify them as pretty different. I just think it's a different ride experience. I think they're going for something different. I think it's a lot more intense, even though it's just as smooth. It's a different sensation. I feel like the layouts aren't really interchangeable. Like you couldn't put a inverted train on a flying coaster, and vice versa. So I think they're distinguishable enough. I mean, you can definitely, just looking at them, kind of see the similarities. But overall, I think they're kind of meant to serve a different purpose. And I think both of them do really well at the area that they're trying to do well, essentially.
Got it. John, you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, it's all besides the train style themselves. I think it's the experience. It's kind of like a looking at a dive coaster versus a floorless coaster. The dive coaster is obviously going to kind of focus on that vertical drop. So while you're still seated, nothing's above or below you, depending on what seat you're in. Like a dive coaster and a wing coaster, I should say. So for me, I definitely put flying coasters in a category of their own.
Across the board, like I mentioned earlier, there's 32 B&M inverts worldwide. How many inverts have you guys ridden? And you think that's enough to, classify you enough where people listening to this podcast could consider your opinion to be an expert opinion?
So I have ridden 13, and I think those include Afterburn at Carowinds, Alpengeist, Busch Gardens Williamsburg, Banshee at Kings Island. I've ridden the Batman, the Ride, clones at Six Flags Great America, which of course was the first, also the first invert that I rode. So it holds a special place in my heart. The ones at Six Flags Magic Mountain, Six Flags St. Louis, and Six Flags Over Georgia. Dragon Challenge, which I count as 2. So rest in peace, former Dueling Dragons at Islands of Adventure. Great Bear at Hershey Park, Montu at Busch Gardens Tampa, Raptor at Cedar Point, and Silver Bullet at Knott's Berry Farm. So I think that's a pretty good range, different styles. Obviously would love to get overseas and ride some of the ones over there, but I think for the U.S. at least, I think that's a fairly diverse mix.
Yeah. Shane, what about you?
I've ridden 6. I would say it's also good diversity there. I have Great Bear at Hershey Park, the Dragon Challenge at Universal, Talon at Dorney Park, Montu at Busch Gardens Tampa, and the Batman the Ride at Magic Mountain.
Got it. Yeah, I've ridden. I'm at 12, and my list it overlaps a lot with John's list. B&M, they've got 18 custom designs, kind of unique, and then they've got the Batman layout, which has been duplicated at multiple Six Flags parks, as well as with Great White at SeaWorld San Antonio, I believe. And so, and then Raptor at Cedar Point is also a kind of a its own thing. So I've ridden every model of B&M invert in the U.S. except for 2, which are Great Bear at Hershey Park and Flight Deck at California's Great America. I'll speak over John's list here for a second. The only one I've ridden that neither of you guys have is Patriot at Worlds of Fun. But John, you mentioned Afterburn at Carowinds. The OGs at Carowinds will always call that ride Top Gun, just because anybody who grew up in the Carolinas when Top Gun was built in the late 90s, it will always be Top Gun. And if you talk to somebody who hasn't been to Carowinds in a while, they say, is Top Gun still there? And then obviously you guys both mentioned Dragon Challenge. It will always be Dueling Dragons to me, no matter how much money the Harry Potter makeover has made Universal. But yeah, I think it's like you both said, it's a very good cross section of differing coasters, differing elements. A lot of them do different things well. But, of the ones you guys have ridden, which ones do you think are the best? And what are some elements that stick out in your mind? And Shane, I'll start with you.
So I guess I'll start with the one that I think is kind of the most unique, in my opinion, which is Great Bear at Hershey Park. And obviously it's unique because right off the lift hill, it's got that helix before it goes into the drop, which is a really unique element. You don't see that on a lot of B&M, certainly not right off the lift hill. And I think it was done because of space constraints at the park when they were building it, because there's so many coasters piled on top of each other in that section. But I think it works to the ride's advantage. It's a really cool start. It's unique. It gives kind of a different introduction into the ride because there's still a drop. You just gotta go through this helix first. Another unique element I would say is on Talon. It's interesting because there's like more, I guess, airtime is what I would call it, than any other invert that I've been on, because the way that it goes about the terrain, it's very close to the ground. There's a few sections where it's diving down towards the ground, and you do get some actual airtime on those, which is cool. And then the Batwing on Montu is super intense. It's one of the more intense elements I've been on. And just that element on any coaster is really great. And especially when you got the speed, and again, another one where you're close to the ground, you're actually in like some dugout tunnel areas for this section. So just the scenery combined with the speed, that Batwing is a great element.
Perfect. John, what about you?
So I have, I guess, a little bit of an unpopular, controversial opinion, but when I think of not necessarily the ones that are the best, but the one that really, I guess, I have the most emotional attachment to would be Batman the Ride at Great America. It was the first invert that I rode. I've spent more time at Great America than I have at any other park. I still think to this day it has one of the most interesting layouts, some history on that ride. There was actually where it was built, there was a Schwarzkopf shuttle loop tidal wave. And so you just think of that model and, it's very narrow, stretched out. They actually built this very compact invert into that space. And so no foot of track is wasted. I mean, from the moment the train leaves the lift hill, it's relentless from start to finish. And I'm also a huge Batman fan. He's my favorite superhero. So, the theme obviously is for a Six Flags park is very, very impressive. You start in Gotham City Park and then kind of work your way into the sewer. The early 90s Batman soundtrack that they play in the station still, at least at Great America. So I just have a lot of fond memories of that coaster. I love the second half. It's just, the speed. I always gray out that first turn after the second vertical loop. It's I love coasters that are very compact like that. The two flat spins at the end. Just the speed. It's a very intense ride, and like I said, it's held up very well. It's it's approaching 30 years old. It will be in 2022, and so it's just a definitely, I don't think anyone would say it was the best ever built. But I think when I'm looking at the other inverted coasters that I've ridden, it's hard for me to pick one that is just from the start to finish, absolutely amazing. I think there are certain elements in each of these that really stand out to me. I love Alpengeist's first drop. I really like the inline twist on Banshee. That was just a very different element that of course has not, to my knowledge, been done on an invert before. You usually see the zero G rolls, which I also like. Dragon Challenge, of course, even though I didn't ride it when it was still dueling, it's just such a intricate layout and the way that it interacts with the two interact with each other. Great Bear, totally agree. Shane, Montu, just the setting. Raptor. These are all, and that's, I think that really speaks to this model from B&M. It's just how iconic some of these rides are. And this isn't really an element, but I think this is more pronounced on B&M inverts than on some of B&M's other coasters, is the B&M roar. And I think that's especially noticeable on Raptor at Cedar Point. I just really, really love that sound. It's just instantly recognizable. So those are, I think, just in general, those are some of my favorite things. But as far as favorite, when I think of B&M invert and the one that it means the most to me, it's Batman the Ride at Great America.
Yeah, John, you mentioned that B&M roar, and I go back to my trip last year to Worlds of Fun. That was the quietest B&M I've ever been around. Like, and I remember I was asking Chris Fauci, friend of the pod, why it was so quiet, and it was one of those things that just stuck out to me. It is that highly recognizable sound. But as far as, some of my favorite elements, I love when a B&M coaster can just work with what it has. It doesn't have to be the tallest or the fastest. And, when I say this, Afterburn / Top Gun at Carowinds comes to mind. And, I interviewed Jerry Helm. He has forgotten more about Carowinds than I will ever learn in my lifetime. But, Jerry was telling me when they constructed Afterburn, they put it at the highest point possible and in the park, just based on the way the park is graded or whatever. And because they put it on the highest point, they had more terrain to work with. So when it goes down, the first drop, I believe, is right around 100 feet, maybe a little bit taller. It goes down kind of into a trench, and you hit that vertical loop. And it is just with the space it's working with, where it stands on the park's skyline. It's very good. Silver Bullet's another one at Knott's. I know there's probably some. I've heard there's some building restrictions or things where certain things can't go a certain height, or at least might have been the case in the past. But Silver Bullet, it's not very tall. It's got a first drop that is not super steep, but that's a coaster that's a ton of fun, and it's got a great Cobra roll. And when I rode it a couple of years ago, the one thing that stuck out to me, there was this trick track element where you kind of were banked to the left, and then you went into a corkscrew to the right. So you kind of had like a little extra, as you're rotating, you had a little extra distance to go. And it just was a really interesting feeling. John, you mentioned that inline twist on Banshee. That's another really, really fun element. I'm a big fan of the Batwing inversions. When you kind of go up into that corkscrew, you go down in a half loop, and then you do the whole thing in reverse. Montu and Afterburn both have this. It's very, very snappy inversion. If you're not ready for it, it could get your neck a little bit, but I think it's especially when they go underground, and I believe Afterburn and Montu both do. It's very fun, and it's very cool to look at too. And then the last question I've got for you guys, and John, I'll start with you. There's like 20-ish B&M inverts out there that you have not. What B&M is at the top of your bucket list?
For me, hands down, Nemesis at Alton Towers. Ever since I got my first roller coaster book as a kid and saw pictures of it, I've just always been enamored by it. Just the Alton Towers in general, how they are, height restricted. And so you've got this totally unique layout, unconventional layout built basically into a hole. And then you have the theming and this, the monster or alien, whatever that is, the Nemesis. It's just, it's such an iconic coaster. I love how the vertical loop, which is typically, the starting element, the starting main element after the first drop, is kind of towards the end. I mean, everything about it. And it seems to be very popular, not only for its, just significance and popularity, but it's actually a really good ride. And so no questions asked, is when I get overseas, that's going to be Alton Towers is going to be one of the first parks I try to get to. And I'll definitely be most likely running to Nemesis. So.
Got it. Shane, what about you? Do you have a B&M invert at the top of your bucket list?
Yeah, I would say I have a few. I think Banshee is one that I just love. The theming is really cool, and the color scheme is great. It's also just the size of it is. I would love to experience that, especially with the vest restraints. I want to try those out on an invert, because I've tried them on other models, but not on the invert. Also the Raptor, probably because that would mean that I would finally be at Cedar Point, but also because it has it's kind of a notoriously good layout. A lot of people have that one at the top of their list as far as inverts. And also Silver Bullet, because that Cobra roll looks awesome. That iconic Cobra roll. Anytime you see a picture of Knott's, you see that. So I think that would also be another one that I would really want to get to soon.
Yeah. I am, if I'm looking at my bucket list, I am going mostly overseas. Roller coasters like Black Mamba at Phantasialand, Nemesis, as you mentioned, John, Osiris at Parc Asterix. I mean, all of these European B&M inverts, they're so well themed. They look amazing. So it's one of those things, just like John said, like once I get to Europe, I've got to start going to some of these parks. Over on the stateside, I need to get to Hershey Park. It's the top of my bucket list, just like Cedar Point's the top of Shane's bucket list. But Great Bear is a coaster I definitely want to ride, and I definitely want to ride Flight Deck at California's Great America. It's again, if I could cross off the two unique custom models, so I will have ridden one of every B&M model in the U.S. I mean, that'd be fun. I gotta give a quick shout out. I don't know if I'll ever get to Happy Valley in China, but there's two family inverts over there that B&M did, and I like the Vekoma family coasters. I think they're actually pretty highly underrated rides, actually. But looking at photos of the family inverted coasters at Happy Valley, and I think that's actually the name, is family inverted coaster. They look like a kind of a souped up B&M version of those Vekoma family coasters, and then they look really fun. Again, it's just one of those, if I can get to Happy Valley, I would love to ride it. And then, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I want to give a quick shout out to Monster at Grunelund in Sweden. And it's under construction. It's been under construction for a couple of years now. And that park is super landlocked. And I don't know if you guys have seen any pictures of this. But it is, again, the first B&M invert built since Banshee in 2014. And talk about landlocked. I mean, this thing, It's right on top of two other coasters. It looks like there's some indoor and outdoor elements. They've got something called a Junior Immelman, which looks really cool. Again, I don't know when my travels are going to take me to Sweden, but Monster, definitely at the top of my list if I ever get over there.
Yeah, I'm looking at the layout now. It looks insane.
Yeah, I just like you're right on top of I think it's an Intamin Zaxbin and another coaster that's just full of supports. I can't really even tell what it is over there, but you're just right on top of it, and you'll be feeling like you're flying out of control over there.
So where do you guys like to sit on it? Because I am pretty much front row or no row, unless it's, there's a super long line and I haven't been on it. But for me, there's just absolutely nothing beats a front row ride on a B&M invert. I mean, it's unlike anything else. What do you guys think?
If I can fit in the front row, I'll sit there. But oftentimes I'm stuck wherever B&M decides to put two seatbelts on a seat. So, but I love a front row ride. A couple years ago, I did coasting for kids at Carowinds and was on Afterburn, and I fit into the seats at that time. And I think I had, in the course of the day, I had like 4 front row rides. And then New Year's Eve, a couple years ago, I rode in the second row just because the line for the first row was really long, and I got to ride Afterburn at midnight. So that was really cool. But I do prefer the front. I think it results in the smoothest ride, especially on those B&Ms that are a little, I'm going to use whippier as a verb, or adjective. But yeah, front row, assuming I can fit, but if I can't fit, wherever they'll have me.
I've had rides in the front and the back. I typically like the front. Again, kind of like John said, there's no other feeling. You got the wind in your face. You got the full speed, especially if you're in the terrain. You can kind of see what's coming up and really feel like you're, entrenched in whatever layout they have going on. The back row is fun because, it's snappy. You get pulled over the elements. But similar to other coasters, there's nothing really like, and you're open as well in those restraints. It feels very open, not restrictive. So front row ride, it's really great.
Anything else you guys want to talk about in regards to B&Ms, or have we discussed everything there is to discuss?
I think we've discussed a good amount.
Yeah, I really hope we see this kind of have a renaissance, because I'm surprised it has been as long as it's been since we've seen a new one built. And so maybe this new one that's opening this year will kind of spark a trend, because I'd really like to see more of these, both in the U.S. and overseas, because I think obviously with the one that's opening this year or in 2021 is kind of going in a new direction. You've got the family inverts. I'd love to see one of those open up in the U.S. So I hope we see more of these. I think I love them.
B&M, if you're listening, we hope you're listening, but please build more inverted coasters. We would love that very much.
Yes,
we would.
But that's going to do it for this week's episode. If you've got a favorite B&M invert that we didn't mention, and we mentioned pretty much all of them, but let us know what your favorite B&M invert is. You can email us at podcast@coaster101.com, or find us literally anywhere social media is to be found. We're at Coaster101. As always, check out the website. But if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably aware of the website. And if you like the podcast, be sure to subscribe, rate, review us wherever you get your podcast. And if we happen to make your Spotify 2020 Wrapped list in between any other podcast, please tell us. Just a reminder that we're selling roller coaster calendars that benefit Give Kids the World. They're $15. They're on our website, and they're selling like hotcakes. So go check those out and get yours today. As always, thanks to JM Music Design for our theme music. And we will talk to y'all again soon.